Midwinter nights on the ridge can feel like the whole world is holding its breath. Not a single branch creaked, not even the wind bothered to whisper. Snowflakes drifted in slow, lazy spirals from a sky so dark it looked bottomless, slipping down to cover the narrow mountain road with a fresh, flawless sheet of white. Hannah Lewis, 32, a medical lab tech, and right now tired enough to cry, steered her little hatchback through one careful curve after another. She had just finished a punishing double shift at the tiny rural clinic, the sort of place where 2 nurses and a doctor do the work of 10. Her eyes stung, her shoulders ached, and in her head she was already inside her front door. Boots off, wrapped in a quilt, the scent of cocoa drifting up from a mug. The road, though, still demanded every ounce of her attention. One patch of ice could send her sliding into the ravine. A quarter-mile later, her headlights caught something. At first, it was only a ripple in the darkness, a shape where no shape should be. She blinked hard, thinking her exhaustion was playing tricks, but the form grew sharper, wide, solid, directly in the center of the lane. Instinct took over. She stamped the brake. Tires hissed across the powder, and the car fishtailed before grinding to a halt. Lit in the twin beams stood a German shepherd, tall and proud, snow peppering its sable coat. The dog didn't flinch. Its ears were forward, its gaze steady, yet its manner was strangely calm, almost formal, as if it understood it was on duty. Then Hannah saw what it carried. Between powerful jaws, cushioned by a strip of thin, faded cloth, was a tiny infant. Her pulse slammed in her throat. Frozen half between panic and awe, she whispered, "Oh my God." As though it had been waiting for a cue, the shepherd lowered its head with infinite care, laid the bundle on the soft snow at the road's edge, and without so much as a bark turned away. It trotted into the tree line and vanished, swallowed by the forest's black mouth. For one heartbeat, Hannah sat stunned, the tick of the cooling engine sounding far too loud in the quiet. Then a thin cry rose from the cloth bundle, fragile and urgent. Training and instinct fused. She killed the engine, grabbed her flashlight, and dove into the night, boots crunching through the drifts toward the child. She had no clue that this single choice, made on a deserted mountain road, would reroute the rest of her life. Long before he became a lone shadow on that road, the German shepherd had another name and another purpose. He had been bred for a job that demanded courage, steadiness, and brains. The military's elite K-9 search and rescue unit, from the moment his paws could support him. Instructors guided him through obstacle courses, taught him to pick a single human scent out of 1,000, and trained him to keep a cool head amid sirens, gunfire, or falling rubble. He wasn't a pet. He was a soldier in fur. When his skills were ready, he was paired with Sergeant David Reyes, a veteran handler who believed the bond between dog and partner should be ironclad. Reyes called him Max, a short name, easy to shout over roaring engines and crashing buildings. Together they worked the worst disasters. Earthquakes where concrete lay like broken bread, avalanches that buried entire trails, and peacekeeping sweeps where an undetected explosive could erase a convoy. Time after time, Max's sharp nose found a trapped survivor or warned of hidden danger seconds before it was too late. Fellow soldiers said he was fearless. Reyes swore he was simply loyal. Everything shifted during a routine sweep of an abandoned military warehouse. Rotting beams groaned overhead. Nobody expected immediate collapse, but metal fatigues without warning. A loud crack split the air, and a section of roof plunged down in a storm of dust and beams. Max dodged the falling debris, but Reyes wasn't as lucky. A jagged steel support crushed his leg, pinning him fast. While medics raced in, reporters snapped photos of the tangled wreckage. The next morning headlines questioned whether canine error had caused the near-fatal mishap. Could the dog have sensed the weak roof? Should the handler have trusted the animal's signals? Public pressure built, and quiet meetings were held. The military chose the simplest route: retire the dog. Issue no statement, move on. No medals, no farewell parade, just a line and a file and a transfer to a handler rotation facility, miles from any battlefield. There the once celebrated shepherd spent days rehearsing for community fairs, school assemblies, and holiday displays, duties that were safe, clean, and painfully dull. He would sit, roll over, accept pats from cheerful children, yet in his eyes the fire of work still burned. The concrete kennels echoed at night, and he paced, ears pricking at every distant rumble, waiting for a call that never came. Night after night he listened to the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, nose pressed to the chain link, remembering the scent of crushed stone, the exhilaration of a find, the proud clap on his shoulder from Sergeant Riaz. In those long hours he decided, though no one can say exactly how a dog decides, that he would not let his skills waste away behind a fence. He sat alone in his kennel, ignoring treats, the toys when the gate was left unlatched one. Stormy evening, hadn't hesitate, he ran into the unknown, into freedom, into a world that would never quite understand the kind of hero had once been. Freedom came at a price. Max, now nameless and forgotten by fuel that once praised him, disappeared deep into the forest. He relied on instinct and training to survive, drinking from creeks, sleeping under fallen trees, learning to track small prey without being seen. But the wilderness wasn't peaceful, not for animals like him along the forest's edge. Danger wore a human face. A group of poachers roamed the area, setting crude traps designed not just for food, but for dogs. Like Max, they captured strays, sold them to illegal training camps for outside state borders. Their dogs were beaten, forced into violent roles, fighting guard duty for criminals, or worse. Max had smelled their scent before. A cigarette smoke, grease, the stench off ears soaked into worn boots. He'd learned to recognize it, to avoid it, to vanish before they got close. He trusted no one daylight meant exposure, so Max moved inly at night, staying near the train, watching from afar. He never came close to homes, never accepted scraps from porches, but hunger wears down even the strongest resolve. One freezing night, with his ribs pressing against his skin and his paws raw from icy ground, Max crept closer to the edge of a small town. The scent of meat from a dumpster behind a store lured him forward. That's when it happened. A sharp metallic snap rang out, going through the trees. A steel trap clamped down on his hind leg. Max yelped the pain, instant and paralyzing. Hethrish growled, tried to pull free, but jaws of the trap were unforgiving. As snow began to fall again, Max lay there trembling, alone and trapped, unsure if this time he would make it out alive. The next morning the forest was still snow-coated, everything in silence, muffling the sound of pain, of breath, off life struggling to hold on. That was when Jack Moore came trudging along the narrow path that cut behind his cabin. Aiming in his late 60s, Jack lived simply with his wife Eliza in a weather-worn wooden cabin near the tree-line. He was shawling a bundle of firewood when he saw a dark shape curled near the road, half buried in snow. He dropped the wood. Wade saw wasn't just any animal. It was a German shepherd, its body thin, its leg clamped in a steel trap, blood staining the white ground around it. Jesus, he muttered, and knelt down without fear. Theta growled low, instinctively, but Jack didn't flinch. He whispered softly, hand steady, voice calm, easy now, fella, we're not going to hurt you. Eliza came running with wire cutters, a warm blanket, and a thermos of broth. It took time, but they freed the dog, wrapped him in cloth, and carried him home. Eliza carefully cleaned his wound, murmuring kin nonsense as she worked. Jack made a small by the fire. Dinner that night was little more than a can of beans and a few slices of dry bread. Jack split the bread, carefully handing the smaller half to Eliza. She didn't argue. She just looked at the dog curled near the fire, shivering. He's starving, she whispered with hesitation. She scooped a bit off beans into an old metal bowl and slid it gently toward him. Max hesitated, mistrust still clinging to him like the cold, but his smell was too tempting. Slowly, cautiously, he leaned forward and began to eat. We don't have much, Eliza murmured, but he needs it more than Wado tonight." Jack nodded silently, watching the dog eat. In that quiet cabin, love didn't come from abundance, it came from sacrifice. When the dog finally opened his eyes again, there was no aggression, just exhaustion. "You look like a Max," Elise said gently, and just like that he had a name, Max. They didn't expect him to stay. He was quiet, watched everything, mistrust, never quite left high size, even as his wounds healed and his coat regained a faint sheen. He slept near the fire, ate cautiously, and flinched at sudden movements, but he never growled, never barked. He just endured. Then one morning he was gone. Thebe by the fire was empty, the door slightly ajar. Jack stood on the porch for a long time, scanning the woods. "Guess he found his way home," he said softly. Eliza didn't answer right away. Her hand rested gently on the small curve of her belly. She was 3 months pregnant, and fatigue had become her constant companion. "I hope he knows," she murmured, "that we meant well, that he mattered, and out there hidden among trees heavy with snow." Max watched, not too close, never too close, but from the shadows he kept an eye on them, especially on Eliza. She had given him warmth, food, and a name now for reasons even he didn't fully understand. He stayed near, not because he was tame, not because he trusted, but because something in her softness, in her quiet kindness, had told him this place is safe. Winter pressed harder now. Ice formed thick on the window panes, and snow gathered like silence around the old wooden cabin inside. Life had changed. Eliza had given birth to a baby girl, small and pink-cheeked, with lungs stronger than anyone expected. They named her Ava. She slept on a woven basket beside the stove, wrapped in a patchwork blanket Eliza had sewn by hand. Her tiny cries echoed through the house at hours, always answered by a tired smile, a warm touch. Jack worked longer days, chopping wood, fixing leaks, and keeping the fire going. Eliza, still awake from labor, moved slowly, but every step carried a mother's quiet determination. And outside, Max remained in the shadows. He hadn't returned since his leg healed, but sometimes they'd find paw prints near the porch. Eliza would look out the window and whisper, "He's still watching." One night after a long day, Jack nodded off in his chair. Eliza laid Ava gently in her basket and began stirring a pot of stew over the tea. The months in his Stovik's house settled over the house like Asukan snowfall. No one noticed the spark. A loose rag had fallen near the base off a stove. The fabric caught flame, slowly thin. Suddenly, all at once, smoke rose. Fire crept up the curtains. Ava slept when Eliza turned too late. Her scream jolted Jack awake. "Get the baby," she cried, but his smoke was already thick. The flames roared toward Ava's corner. Jack grabbed Eliza's hand, pulled her toward the door. She resisted, screaming Ava's name. "We have to go," Jack shouted, coughing, high size burning. "Can't leave her." Eliza sobbed, but the fire had swallowed Therum. He dragged her into the snow. They collapsed in the yard, helpless. Their home was a wall of flame. Their child was inside. Then from the trees a dark shape surged forward. Max, no hesitation, no fear, burst through the smoke teeth. Bared eyes locked. He didn't run from the fire, ran into it. Inside the cabin, fire roared like a beast unchained. Max plunged into the smoke, his eyes stinging, his lungs burning. He followed the sun through a blistering heat, past collapsing beams. He found her, Ava, curled in her basket, face flushed from the rising heat. Whimpered faintly, barely moving. Max stepped forward, nudged the edge of the blanket with his nose, then gently clamped his jaws around the thickest part. Careful, so careful. The flame screamed around him, devouring everything in their path. Max crouched low and turned. The front door was gone, just fire and falling debris. He spun, eye-circling wildly, the window gathering jeevery. Last ounce of strength. Max charged. Glass shattered as he burst through us, body landing hard in the snow. Ava cradled carefully in his mouth. The cold hit like a hammer. Blood poured from his side, where shards of glass had torn through fur and flesh. But he didn't stop. Staggered to his feet, adjusted the weight of the child, and limped forward. Wind howled. The night was black and endless behind him. The house collapsed, a blazing monument to what had almost been lost. Each step left a crimson mark in snow, but Max kept moving through thickets and underbrush, through frozen silence and stabbing pain. He moved, drawn by something older than memory duty instinct love, at last to reach the open road, headlights flickering faintly in the distance. With one last push, he climbed the snow embankment and laid Ava gently on the ground. Then he curled around her tiny body, shielding her from the wind, his own body shivering uncontrollably behind the pain he prayed if a thing existed in. Dogs that Simeon would stop, that someone would see headlights pierce the dark. Ashana Lewis rounded the final bend on icy mountain road. She had just finished a grueling double shift and was barely holding herself together, half dreaming of leftover soup and a warm bed. Then she saw a dark shape huddled near the roadside, snow swirling around it. She pulled over hard, thudding, and stepped out into the bitter cold. Her boots crunched across the frozen gravel. As she drew closer, the scene came into focus. A German shepherd, its fur matted stained with blood, stood protectively over a motionless bundle. Ababy Hannah gasped and knelt. The dog looked at her, exhausted, weary. Then without a sound it turned and ran, so hot, dissolving into darkness, fading like a silent promise, disappeared into the forest. Gone. Hannah barely had time to process what she'd seen. Her instincts kicked in. She reached for Thebaby, cold, pale, but breathing. "Oh my God," she whispered, peeling off her jacket. She wrapped the child tight and held her close to her chest. From the trunk, she grabbed her emergency kit, thermal blankets, hand warmers, a stethoscope. She checked vitals, shallow breath, no obvious injuries, but Ava was slipping into hypothermia. She called 911. No service. A car passed. She waved, frantic, linking another. This time, a small hatchback stopped. A couple jumped out. "Hannah didn't waste a second. She needs to get to the hospital. No, I'll ride with her," she said. The woman nodded and helped Hannah into her car. As they drove off, Hannah looked out into the dark woods one last time. There was no sign of the dog. It was just after dawn when the call came. A nurse from the regional hospital reached out to the fire department, who then contacted the local sheriff. Word spread quickly to the few remaining neighbors huddled near the ruins of Jack and Eliza Moore's burned cabin. Someone banged on the car window where Jack and Eliza had spent the night, wrapped in borrowed blankets, eyes red from grief and smoke. "Maybe you found her," the man said breathlessly. "A baby alive." The couple didn't wait for details. They jumped into a deputy truck and rode in silence, clutching each other's hands all the way to the hospital. The hospital hallway was quiet save for the distant beeping of machines and soft shuffling of nurses. Jack and Eliza Moore sat in plastic chairs, clothes soaked, faces pale with smoke and worry. Eliza's hands trembled in her lap. Jack hadn't spoken in minutes. Then a nurse approached her, expression calm. "Butkin, she's going to be okay," she said gently. Eliza gasped. Her body shook with relief as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Jack let out a broken breath and covered his face. "She's alive." "Heck," the nurse nodded. "A woman found her. A medical technician said a dog led her there." "A dog?" Eliza asked, her voice barely a whisper. "She said he was injured, looked like he'd been in the fire, but by the time help arrived, he was gone." Eliza clutched Jack's arm. It was Max. Jack's eyes welled up. "He came back, saved her." They were led into their recovery room, where Ava, still pale, was resting under warm blankets. Wires monitored her tiny heartbeat, slow but steady. Eliza knelt by her side, brushing damp hair from Ava's forehead. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Max." Butut sighed. In the snowy woods beyond the hospital, there was no sign of the dog, no paw prints, no shadow between the trees. Max was gone again, just as suddenly as had returned weeks past. The fire was ruled accidental. The cabin, reduced to blackened timber and twisted metal, was declared a total loss. But inside the hearts of Jack and Eliza Moore, something far more precious had survived. Ava recovered slowly. She remained in the hospital for several days under heat lamps and constant observation, but her strength returned, small, steady, stubborn. When they finally brought her home, it wasn't to the charred ruins. Neighbors helped rebuild a small structure nearby, simple but dry and warm, anew. Beginning, Jack repaired the roof on chilly afternoon, hammering the last panel into place when he looked up toward the edge of the woods there just beyond. The teary-eyed stood a shadow still, watching Max. Jack called out, stepping off the ladder, his voice cracked softer than a whisper. "Is that you, boy?" The dog didn't move at first, then cautiously he stepped forward. Eliza stepped out onto the porch holding Ava bundled in layers. Her eyes widened when she saw the figure in the snow. Jack dropped to one knee. "You came back. You saved her, didn't you?" Max patted closer, slow but sure. His eyes locked on Ava. Lisa knelt beside Jack. "Do you want to see her?" she whispered. Max lowered his head and crept forward. Ava stirred, let out a small sound. Max's ears perked. He gently nuzzled her foot with his nose. Eliza's eyes welled with tears. "It was you. I know it was you." They wrapped their arms around the dog, holding him tightly. Max didn't resist. "You don't have to run anymore," Jack murmured. "You're home if you want it." Max pressed into them slightly, just enough to answer. From that moment, he wasn't a shadow anymore. He was family. Max never left again. He followed Ava's every step as he learned to walk, lay by the fireplace during her naps, and sat quietly by Fepperch whenever Eliza hummed lullabies. Jack called him the smartest soul I've ever met, but Max still flinched at loud noises, and once when a group of hunters passed near their land, he bolted under the house trembling. That was the day Jack reported everything. His testimony helped dismantle a network of illegal dog trafficking that had haunted the Nerby woods for years, and soon dogs like Max no longer had to hide. They roamed freely along the forest's edge, guarding livestock, chasing away predators, sleeping in sunlit fields without fear. Max grew older, slower, but never far from Abba in that little house at the edge of the trees. There was no more running, just peace, warmth, and the quiet love of a dog who once carried. Ackled through fire,